telling you a little bit how I came to this work. I'm American born, but I moved to the Netherlands when I was very young with my family. And growing up in Holland through my adolescence, I came back here at 21. I never knew or even heard of any teenager who became pregnant. It was just something I never heard of. I knew lots of people who were having sex, but I didn't ever hear of folks becoming pregnant. What was common for my friends, what I saw around me, what you would see on TV or read about is when young people were becoming ready to get to that point in their lives, they'd usually go to their parents, go and see the family doctor, get on the pill. And that was really not something I thought very much about. And when I came here on holidays, or especially after I moved here, I noticed that there was a big disconnect for parents and teens around sexuality. And that for young people it was often difficult to raise the topic, especially for girls. And I even found myself, when I was 16, writing a long letter to one of my friends here explaining her menstrual cycle and when she would be most fertile, and urging her to go on the pill because she had a boyfriend, and it looked like it was coming, and asking her to talk to her mother, but she felt she wasn't able to. So it was really out of these experiences of why is this different, what are the consequences, and how could those change that I wrote the book, which, as you know, became titled Not Under My Roof, Parents, Teens, and the Culture of Sex. And in light of the conference's theme, I'm just going to check the time to keep myself here within our time limit. In light of the theme of the conference, gender, I want to focus on some gender themes that came out of the research I did. And I'm going to start with the U.S. teens and the experiences and themes that came from there, and then I'm going to move to the Dutch themes. And I want to just start with a couple of stories or quotes. And I'm going to start with Fiona, and these are all pseudonyms. And Fiona belongs to the 50% of American girls, we know from NSFG, the data that just came out, whose parents do not discuss methods of contraceptives with them, 50%, half of American teens. And Fiona tells me that in her family, a lot is said without words. My mother is against anybody experimenting with sex before they're married, and she grew up with that, and so she passes it along to us. Just as that is what she thinks, but she lets us pretty much think what we want. But I know it would be suicide if I ever got pregnant. I would literally be dead, cast out of the family kind of thing. But at the same time, I know that my parents would stand by me and make sure I got through it, but I don't even want to try. So Fiona is kind of at one end of the extreme, right? Has parents who don't even bring up the topic of contraception. In some ways, more interesting to me were girls like Caroline. Caroline is 17. Another American girl. She has a boyfriend her parents like. She actually told her mother that she and her boyfriend are having sex. Her mother said, "Oh my God, I need a cigarette." But she was like, "I'm glad you're telling me, make sure that get you on birth control." And then I asked Caroline a question which took most American interviewees by surprise, but I asked it, I said, would your parents let your boyfriend spend the night with you at home? And Caroline says, "No, my parents would kill me." She's spent a few nights at her boyfriend's house. My parents don't know about it. Actually, they know about one time, and they got kind of mad. I told them I was sorry, and then I wouldn't do it again. And then she says, "But I can understand my parents." She sort of understands it. She says, "They don't want to know that I'm doing it. It's kind of like, oh my God, my little girl is having sex kind of thing. It's just really overwhelming to them. and they don't want to know that their little girl is in their house having sex with a guy. That's just scary to them. They don't want to let me have a guy in my room without the door open. And I highlight this theme because this theme of their little girl was one that came up time and again in interviews with American young women. And it's difficult because the girls I've interviewed indicate that their role as a good daughter to their parents, a rule follower, a communicator, and their sexual development as a young person are in conflict. And this is a conflict that is especially deeply felt by young women in this country. And adds as a sort of a psychic burden, because a lot of times these girls have had close relationships with their parents in other areas, but then they are concerned about violating the notion of the good little girl. And we know, of course, that for young men, things are a little bit different. But they're not as different as we might think they are. So yes, some young men get sort of tacit permission from their fathers to go out and have sex. But a lot of times they also get messages that they shouldn't, or that they don't, you know, it can possibly ruin their life, and we'll be talking about that this afternoon in our workshop, the risks of sex. But regardless of what message they're getting, the American boys I interviewed also, like girls, experience sex as something that separates them from their parents, that leads to what I call a psychology of separation. And to indicate that, I'm just going to read just a quote from Michael. And he is now 18, but he looks back on when he was 16, and I focused on the age of 16 and 17. And he says, when he first started having, these are not his words yet, when he first started having sex with his girlfriend during his sophomore year, Michael first kept it secret. And this is what he says. It was more of a sneaking around type of thing, because you're still not quite sure how your parents feel about you having sex, or feel about you having a girlfriend. Like, I didn't know if they thought I was too young to have a girlfriend. Basically, I just didn't really even want them to know. Just didn't even really want them to be in my life. And I think this is important too, because this touches on the theme that Elizabeth Schroeder talked about yesterday in her workshop on boys. I don't know if any of you were there, but that boys close down in this country, and they close down around sexuality and emotions. And I think Michael really illustrates that. So even though we think of boys as having more permission in some ways to go out and have sex, it is still something that they close down around, especially vis-a-vis their parents. It doesn't have to be this way. This is not an inherent, inevitable aspect of being young and growing up. And to illustrate that, I'm going to read you two stories from two Dutch teens, and then wrap up by giving you my thoughts about what this means and what the implications are. And I'll do it fast, because I don't have too much time. A Dutch boy that I interviewed said that when he was 14, his father spoke to him about sex. Yes, they explained contraception very well, especially my father. You know, it was really a conversation for men, among one another. You feel more comfortable. Also, says Karsten, he has no doubt that he's been in love. He says it's fun, but it's a very strange experience. You think about her almost constantly. You start to wonder, what will I say this evening? Being in love, he describes, is like having a warm feeling for someone. And I'm pointing this out because the Dutch teens, unlike their American counterparts, didn't doubt that they could fall in love. Falling in love is a very common experience. In national surveys, 90% of Dutch 14-year-olds say that they've been in love. So there's a way in which sex is contextualized within love and relationships. And in terms of discussing sexuality with parents, Karsten explains what happened when he first had sex. He describes discussing it with his girlfriend and coming to the conclusion that they wanted it, and then he discusses asking his parents whether his girlfriend can sleep over. And he says, we talked about it, kind of very carefully, feeling our way. My parents were like, what exactly do you want? And I was like, well, what would they allow? And after a while, I just plainly asked, would it be allowed? And then they said yes. They'd rather that I'm at home when I'm going to do something like that than that I'm elsewhere. Because they know if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if it happens at home, at least they know where I am. So this is Karsten. And it is not just boys who have this experience. I want to close it with the story of, yes, is there questions? No. I want to close with a story by Karel Doorman, the father of a 16-year-old girl in the Netherlands. And he says that his daughter Heidi, if she were to have a sexual relationship, he says that she's 16, almost 17. I think she knows very well what matters and what can happen. And if she's ready, I would let her be ready. So this recognition that young people can become ready during the second half of their teenage years, that sex typically happens within a relationship and that it can be negotiated within the family, is a common pattern that I found in the Netherlands, and that it allows youth to stay more connected, and it allows parents to have more of an influence as young people come of age. So, what are the lessons that we can learn in the U.S. from this? Well, first of all, it's not that, permit sleepovers and everything's going to be okay. This is not the point. But the point is that it is possible for cultures to change, to move, as James was advocating that we do, towards a normalization of teen sexuality. Dutch society was not always the way it is today. This change happened very rapidly in the 1960s and 70s. And that it is possible to approach teen sexuality as something that can happen in a healthy way, that it can be part of a young person's emotional development, that it doesn't have to make boys and girls into these opposite groups that are pursuing opposite strategies, and that I think the final piece is that it's not really just up to parents to figure this out, how to make this change happen. That when we look at the Dutch case, we can see that the normalization of teen sexuality and its negotiation within the family takes place in a wider context, in which schools play a role, in which healthcare providers play a role, social workers, all of you in the room play a very important role in that. I would like to say more, but I know I've run